Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Indycar on Tuesday, the 21st of August 2018. I'm Gordon Ross. Today's subjects are slightly unusual. I want to take a step back in time, 65 years, and also have a look again at the issues concerning Northern Ireland. Now, the reason I want to take a step back 65 years is because August the 19th, in fact just a couple of days ago, was the 65th anniversary of the coup in Iran, which saw the elected leader of the Iranian state deposed by force by a coup d'etat, which placed the Shah of Iran back on the throne. Now, most of you probably unaware of the history of Iran and Britain's involvement in it, but as far back as 1908, the British government had been drilling for oil in Iran, had struck oil and formed what was called at the time the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which later became what we now know as BP. This was all great and wonderful, except that in the lead up to World War II, the Shah of Iran, at the time of World War II, professed to be in favour of the Germans, and therefore the British government was not happy about that at all and ensured that he was removed. Now, on the way along the route, as it were, the British government was exploiting Iranian oil and giving virtually nothing back to the Iranian state. It had signed or forced the Iranian government to sign a very bad deal where the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, in other words the British government, was taking over 90% of the value of the oil from Iran, from the Iranian oil fields, and using that oil to fund its own war fighting, because the British Navy at that time had just switched from coal to oil-fired shipping. So they needed the oil to fight the war, which I kind of can understand back in the day of World War II that they needed that, and they wanted to get rid of the Shah because they didn't want a pro-Nazi in charge of the Iranian oil fields. However, what happened next was even worse. The Iranians got fed up with being exploited, as you might expect, in the same way that Scotland is exploited to this day by the British state. Our oil fields plundered and we get nothing back. The Iranians were equally fed up with this, and their elected official eventually decided that what he wanted to do was nationalise the Iranian oil industry and use the money from that to fund a programme which would have eradicated poverty in Iran and brought what was a very poor backward nation into, at the time, the 20th century, making Iran one of the most modern states in the Middle East. Now, when the British got wind of this, they decided they couldn't be having that, because that meant they would lose control of the oil wealth of this other state. Now remember, Britain had been plundering Iranians' oil for the best part of something like 40 years by this point, and they were going to continue doing so as long as they wanted. But the problem was that the elected government, this is the one that was elected legally, this was not in any way any kind of takeover, military or otherwise, was about to nationalise the oil industry in Iran and boot the British company out. They weren't going to have that, so what did they do? They went to their friends in America and said, look, we need to organise a coup. We need to get rid of this guy and prevent the Iranians from nationalising their oil industry and basically kicking Anglo-Iranian oil out, what, as I say, became known as BP. The Americans, with their military might and with their massive resources, used both the CIA and MI6 operatives inside Iran to bribe most of the key officials so that their coup would happen swiftly and without any resistance. And they instantaneously removed the sitting leader at the time and replaced him again with the son of the Shah of Iran, who became the new Shah. And this was another one of these puppet leaders that the West likes to install when it's ripping oil off from somebody, or when somebody wishes to sell oil in something other than dollars. And this event, this coup d'etat, where the leader of Iran was deposed and replaced by a Western placeman, is actually 65 years ago, almost to the day that this happened. The reason I mention this is partly it's a history lesson, but also we want to learn from mistakes that other countries have made in the past when dealing with the UK and oil. Scotland has even vaster oil fields, I believe, than the Persian Gulf had at the time. And we run the risk of coming up against a British state which is going to be desperate to hang on to as much of the oil fields as they can after Brexit, and they will do anything in their power to prevent Scotland from A, becoming independent, and B, nationalising their oil industry. And particularly nationalising the oil industry was the thing that they feared the most. And the way they actually deposed the Iranian leader was by claiming that he was a communist. And at the time, in 1953, was the time of McCarthy in America and the witch hunts to root out any communist sympathisers. So the Americans were right up for it. And by labelling this man as a communist, which he wasn't, it was a lot easier for them to convince the rest of the world and the people of Iran to get rid of him. Smear campaigns, bribery, the usual deceptions employed by the British state were employed in this case. And as I say, I'm saying this now because I think, although the times have changed and it's unlikely that we would see somebody trying to instigate a coup in Holyrood, that it is entirely likely that in the event that Scotland did vote yes towards to independence, or was likely to do so, that the British state would suspend devolution instantly and try and take over Scotland and have Mundell in place as some kind of viceroy. It's not beyond the bounds of possibility for the British state to act in this way. Although they will use more modern methods, they're not going to be doing this at gunpoint. They will figure out some quasi-legal way of doing this in the usual way that they do, by writing the rules themselves. However, I'm just warning you now that when we do become independent, there will be problems with oil. And I think we have to anticipate the fact that the British state will not play fair. They will try everything in their power and deploy every kind of trick, dirty trick, that they can do to prevent us from quite legally taking back what already is in the possession of the Scottish state, and that is its oil fields and its territorial waters. So, a warning from history: the Iranians suffered a military coup because of British oil interests, and Iran was exploited for its oil in precisely the same way that Scotland is exploited for its oil now. And I think we have to learn the lessons of history there. Now, moving on, yesterday I was talking about the fact that I didn't believe the British government was going to be able to come up with any kind of deal in the next 6 weeks which would satisfy the EU on the future of Northern Ireland and its trading relationship with the South. And the reason I said that was simply because nobody yet from any party or any organisation or any university has come up with a viable scheme which would allow Northern Ireland's 6 provinces to trade across the border into the EU without some kind of customs union. Because a customs union is essential, an agreement about customs is essential in order for both sides of that border to be able to trade without having to have the goods checked before they go across the border. And because of that, because there's no physical way of doing that without border checkpoints, I don't believe the British state will come up with something that's acceptable to the EU. I mentioned yesterday also the issue of Gibraltar, and I've received some more information which has corrected my earlier assumption that Gibraltar was a big issue as well and might not be soluble. It is apparently in the process of having sort of broad brush solutions for Gibraltar already in place. And apparently the EU are satisfied for the moment that the UK has some kind of arrangement in the pipeline for Gibraltar. Also, the issue of EU citizens' rights within the UK is soluble, and although the UK's initial reaction and initial offer was not really sufficient for the EU, the experts now believe that there is possibly enough room for agreement on this issue of the rights of European citizens who remain and live in the UK as UK residents. So that is also possibly going to be solved. But the consensus across Europe with everybody I've spoken to, including politicians and political scientists and other pundits of all descriptions, is that they cannot square the circle of Northern Ireland. There are only really two options: hard Brexit with no deal and a hard border, or reunification of Northern Ireland with the South, so it becomes part of the European Union. Now, the vast majority of people in Northern Ireland of both unionist and nationalist persuasions voted to remain in the European Union. They didn't vote to leave. It's only the DUP which wants to leave the European Union and wants there to be a border built across the centre of Northern Ireland, because only the DUP wants to remain desperately part of the UK and will not countenance any kind of reunification agreement with the South. So unless something dramatic happens and suddenly the DUP gives up their ridiculous stance on let's have our cake and eat it, regurgitate it and eat it again, then the only way forward would be for there to be a wall built across Northern Ireland between North and South. It's the only way, because there isn't a way in which you can have a customs union without having a customs union, because that's what's being proposed. The British government hoping to fudge it and call it something else, but it would be a customs union, and no matter how they dress it up, the DUP would never wear it. And also, no matter how you dress that up, the rest of the UK wouldn't wear it, particularly Scotland, which would also want to have the same arrangement for customs union that the Northern Irish have. So it cannot be squared. And everybody I've spoken to predicts that the talks will fall on that single point. Northern Ireland is the fulcrum. It's the actual focal point of the whole Brexit house of cards. If you take away, or if Northern Ireland has failed to resolve, the entire rest of the structure collapses on top of it, because it's the weakest point in the Brexit structure. And it is the one problem that the UK government cannot find a solution for. You cannot build a house on fudge. You know, it will just sink and collapse. And that's what's happening at the moment. In 6 weeks' time, everything will suddenly unravel. We're beginning to hear more and more news stories about how various government organisations are complaining about the lack of information on what they should do when there's a no-deal Brexit. The health service is desperately worried now that they have no instructions at all from government, from the civil service, on what to do, what the procedures will be, where the stockpiles of medicines will be. At the moment, there could be stockpiles in some areas and shortages in others. We're seeing the same thing coming from businesses, starting to panic about whether they will be able to trade or not, how much the taxation will be, what will happen on the 29th, because there will be no transition, there'll be a sudden drop-off. How are we going to fly airplanes in and out of the busiest airport in the world? Heathrow is the biggest and busiest international airport on the planet, and suddenly 40% of the flights would have to stop dead, like in mid-air, and just fly back to Europe, or land back at Heathrow. They wouldn't be able to fly into and out of each other's airspace. There's so many things that are going to just fall to bits, and it was all based on Northern Ireland. Unless the British state gives up Northern Ireland in 6 weeks' time, the whole Brexit deal will collapse. And it's as simple as that. And every political pundit I have spoken to, every expert I've spoken to across Europe says Ireland will kill Brexit. Northern Ireland is the thing that will kill it stone dead. Everything else could be solved, but Northern Ireland can't be. Until the British stop their occupation of Northern Ireland, give it back, there can be no Brexit. So if they want Brexit badly enough, the cost of it will be reunification of Ireland. And that is the opinion of hundreds, maybe thousands of different experts across the EU. Even in the UK, Ireland, Southern Ireland, Scotland, people all agree that the only way for Britain to Brexit cleanly and get a deal is for them to relinquish Northern Ireland. And I don't believe, and I don't think anybody else believes, that the British state would do that. Remain to be proved wrong, but that's the basic fact of the matter. Everything hinges on whether or not the 6 counties of Northern Ireland can be reabsorbed back into the European Union without any borders. Can that be agreed? I don't know. Would the European Union come to some arrangement which would allow Northern Ireland to be in the EU and not? I don't think so. It's got to be one or the other. They can't be in both camps. As usual, Britain wants to have its cake and eat it. The DUP wants to have its cake and eat it, and then have another piece of the cake and eat that as well, and have it. It's not going to work. So let's see what happens, but reunification seems to be the only solution to the problem. And if you can think of a better solution, please let me know, because I'd love to hear it. I'll see you later. Bye for now.